a difficult holiday season for the same reason we've been talking about for 8-9 weeks at this point. The mass atrocities occurring in Gaza. And so, once again, we will open the show talking about it because, I don't know about you, but it's all I think about day and night. And, you know, the Biden administration is continuing to insist that a two-state solution is the objective after this war. And I continue to despise the framing of this as a war. It is crimes of genocide in Gaza. That's more appropriate, given the one-sided nature of this, obviously, and the history of the occupation and the apartheid, as we know very well. He keeps insisting that that is the objective after this mass campaign of killing is over. And we've gone through this on this program, that the two-state solution at this point is impossible. It's a pipe dream for liberals who want to continue the vision of an ethno-state in Israel, where it is a Jewish state in ethnicity, and the Palestinians are kept as second-class citizens if they live within the state, and the rest of them, we don't want to see you.
And strongly encouraged to leave.
Yes, right. And the problem with a two-state solution is that if you look at the maps of how much territory Israel has taken since the 1967 borders were drawn, and before that, since the foundation of the State of Israel, and in the past 2 decades or so, just the promulgation of settlers into what is supposed to be Palestinian territory, 700,000 far-right settlers seizing Palestinian homes in the West Bank. I believe that's the figure in the West Bank. It makes it an impossibility because so much of the territory is already gone. Just from a geographical
people
point.
don't understand, after 67, they occupied the West Bank, and immediately, when we start talking about human shields, immediately started putting civilian settlers there.
Yes.
Which is against the Geneva Conventions.
I mean, they've been in violation of international law for decades. And so it's just, unless you want to remove the 700,000 far-right, heavily armed settlers from the West Bank, then a two-state solution is an impossibility.
Yeah, be clear about what you mean.
And even then, we're talking about something that's a very difficult thing to achieve. It's
a UN occupation for a long time to keep peace. Settlers were kept out of Gaza, removed from Gaza, and they made a big, huge stink about it 20 years ago.
Right. It's a pipe dream. There needs to be one state. You can call it Israel-Palestine. They can have their own governments and have some joint congresses at certain points to discuss trade after we have a Truth and Reconciliation Committee to repair this immense damage that has been done, not just over the past few months, but in the years prior as well. But again, the Biden administration insists that's how they want to move forward. But the Israeli government has repeatedly said, no, not a multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy like we advocate for, one state of just Israelis.
Greater Israel, it's all ours.
It's all ours, from the river to the sea, if you will. And don't take it from me. Take it from the Israeli ambassador to the the ambassador of Israel to the United Kingdom, speaking with Sky News' Mark Austin yesterday about a two-state solution.
Involvement, then forget about refugee camps. Why should they be refugees after 70 years of having independent life? They could have built their own life, but they didn't.
But re-education is the kind of, you think of China and you think of...
Absolutely not. This is what you did.
Camps
this is what you did in Nazi Germany. This is what the
Muslim
British
Uyghurs and so forth.
You're not learning from your own history. In this residence that you came to, there is a Churchill painting. There is one thing we learned from Churchill's experience, fighting Chamberlain's policy, is the fact you cannot appease pure evil. So he knew you cannot negotiate with Hitler.
Can you pause it?
We know we can.
So comparing the Palestinian population to Nazis is Holocaust revisionism. It's so far right and extreme that I don't even know how to really articulate it, but it's shared by Benjamin Netanyahu, who engages in Holocaust revisionism regularly. and in a few years ago gave a speech that he had to, I think, apologize for, in which he said that Hitler did not actually want to exterminate the Jews and that he got the idea from the Palestinian Grand Mufti, which is a claim that has been widely debunked, but serves to say that the Nazis weren't as bad as the Palestinian people. And that's why we need to we should justify killing them. And this is clearly a conspiracy theory that is widely shared within the highest ranks of the Israeli government.
Insane people, in other words, yeah.
Cannot appease pure evil. So he knew you cannot negotiate with Hitler. We know we cannot negotiate with Hamas. It means we need to have a better future for the Palestinians. And in order to achieve that, you need to
pause it again. We can't negotiate with Hamas, but we want them to be funded and we want them to rule Gaza. They are worse than Hitler, and yet the official policy of the Likud party and the Netanyahu government is to allow money to come through Qatar to go to Hamas in order to prop them up.
Just to back up to the thing she said at the very beginning, like they could have built a life that entire year. Why are they still refugees? That entire time, they had a right to return to the lands that they were kicked off of. That's the UN said you have right to the return, and that's always been the obstacle, because that means, oh no, there are actually too many Arabs here for our Jewish democracy to be a Jewish democracy. That's all this is.
Yep.
And so, like, they could have built a life. No, they actually had a legal right to resistance all this entire time, and also an obligation to, or legal right to return to their homes. People still have the keys to their homes. Like, this was an act of violence, and it's continued to lead to a spiral of violence that we all have to live through now.
Is there still a chance for a two-state solution?
I think it's about time for the world to realize the Oslo paradigm failed on the 7th of October, and we need to build a new one. And in order to build a new one...
Does that new one include the Palestinians living in a state of their own? Is that what it includes?
I think the biggest question is, what type of Palestinians are on the other side? This is what Israel realized on the 7th of October.
Though?
The answer is absolutely no, and I'll tell you why.
Well, then
because
how can
at
there
the
be
moment,
peace?
no, I'll answer to you. The reason there is no peace
Israel
is because the Palestinians...
without offering a state to Palestine, how can there be peace in Israel?
Israel knows today, and the world should know now, the reason the Oslo Accords failed is because the Palestinians never wanted to have a state next to Israel. They want to have a state from the river to the sea.
So the two-state solution is dead.
As I advocate.
Why are you obsessed with a formula that never worked, that created this radical people in the other side? Why are you obsessed with that? Think about it. Is that normal to carry on with a solution that never worked in the past? Okay. The Palestinians kept on denying, and now it will create another terror state. Israel is not interested in that.
Final question.
It's all projection. I mean, as you have said a few times, every accusation, Matt, every accusation is an admission here. So when she says the Oslo paradigm failed, I want to read this piece from 972 magazine from 2020 regarding Rabin, and it's called "The Myth of Rabin as the Peacemaker," in reference to the Oslo Accords. And this was after Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez canceled a participation in an event that honored Rabin. And so 972 wanted to basically correct the record on this history here, and I'll read a bit of this piece. Rabin's decision to stake his career on negotiations with the Palestinian Liberation Organization, once an unthinkable prospect for most Israelis, was indeed daring. His outreach to Palestinian citizens of Israel to help him keep a government mandate and advance the accords was unprecedented. Many Palestinian citizens supported the peace process and even mourned Rabin's death. These nuances, however, do not compensate for the fundamental problem with the way Rabin is revered in Israel and abroad. His persona as a, quote, warrior turned peacemaker is almost exclusively centered on the final 4 years of his life, 5 decades of which were defined by hawkish and militaristic views. Shimon Peres, Rabin's rival turned ally, eventually received the same idolizing treatment. This cult of personality, dotingly crafted by the Zionist left in Israel and liberal Zionists in the United States, has particularly relied on a counterfactual argument that had he not been killed, Rabin might have helped to bring about a two-state solution. By the way, Rabin killed by an extremist Zionist because he even dared to speak to the Palestinians. Yeah. Ironically, the first person to dispute this narrative may have been Rabin himself. The words Palestinian state do not appear in the accords he signed, a fact that he and other Israeli officials were careful to ensure. A month before his assassination, Rabin told the Knesset that his vision was to give Palestinians an entity which is less than a state, was the quote. a precedent to the state minus advocated today by Netanyahu and outlined in Trump's deal of the century. Rabin also insisted that the Jordan Valley would remain Israel's quote security border, the very plan that drew international outcry this year, again, this is written in 2020, when Netanyahu pledged to formally annex the area. If Rabin's words were simply politicking with Israeli voters, then his government's actions spoke more clearly. From 1993 to 1995, according to Peace Now, Israel initiated the construction of over 6,400 housing units and settlements. In that time, according to B'Tselem, Israel also demolished at least 328 Palestinian homes and some structures, including in East Jerusalem, which Rabin sought to keep, quote, united under Israeli sovereignty. The result was that Israel's settler population rose by 20,000 and Palestinians were displaced in the thousands while Rabin sat at the negotiating table. All the while, Rabin's government used Oslo not as a blueprint to end the occupation, but to restructure it and minimize the cost to Israelis.
Yep.
The burden of controlling the occupied population was transferred to the newly created Palestinian Authority, which quelled nonviolent resistance and targeted armed militants on Israel's behalf. When you see those numbers about how people in Gaza and in the West Bank disapprove of the Palestinian Authority, you can understand why. The Paris Protocol, which effectively held the Palestinian economy and their resources hostage to Israeli discretion, further cemented the economic exploitation of the Palestinians. These systems are still in place today, 2 decades after Oslo's expiration date. So let's just be clear here. This should dispel all myths about liberal Zionism, because the liberal Zionist two-state solution vision, especially as this article espouses, which is, ignorantly repeated here in the United States, is not even shared by the figurehead of liberal Zionism within Israel. It's always been expansionist. It's a settler colonial project, folks.
Yep, prove them wrong.
And the trauma of the Holocaust, one of the worst crimes in human history, 6 million Jews exterminated by a fascist government, obviously by the Nazis, has been exploited to run cover for a project that is fundamentally, obviously, one of the most atrocious things that we will ever live through. And what we're seeing now is just the final solution. I use that phrase to be provocative, but also to be accurate, of what the initial project always was meant to do.
Yeah, they're going for it. I mean, and that's the problem with liberal Zionists, is they want to, again, still somehow talk to college kids instead of the actual leaders of Israel. I would recommend, and the problem I have about this and where we're at in this conversation is this is so far behind where the conversation needs to be. Avi Shlaim 10 years ago in The Guardian, it's now clear the Oslo peace accords were wrecked by Netanyahu's bad faith. And this is Avi Shlaim, who was a two-state guy in the 90s. I thought the peace accords 20 years ago could work, but Israel used them as cover for its colonial project in Palestine. And just one paragraph. Critical to the architecture of Oslo was the notion of gradualism. The text did not address any of the key issues in this dispute. Jerusalem, the right to the return of the 1948 refugees, the status of Jewish settlements built on occupied Palestinian land, or the borders of Palestinian entity. All these were put aside because of how, frankly, unwilling to negotiate Israel was before that. People thought let's just at least they're not treating them as animals or just terrorists, and are at least engaging in a political process. And they weren't serious about that at all. And actually, there's a huge problem. You want to talk about terrorist violence? Actually, that is in Israel, because that's who you see the point well taken. So can the Biden administration actually take Israel at its word? They're not interested in the two-state solution. When they say from the river to the sea is a call of genocide, it's projection, because for them, they want just Israel from the river to the goddamn sea, and the surplus population of Gaza, of the West Bank, of the women and children and grandmothers and families and poets and beautiful human beings with lives. I mean, they're just in the way.
So,
and you know what I was going to say is like the assassination of Rabin. Look at what Yitzhak Rabin, who again, like I think AOC was right to not go glorify Rabin because I think is all cynical. But look at the way his wife wouldn't shake Bibi Netanyahu's hand afterwards. And when we talk about a pathological violence in a society that is an obstacle to peace in a region, that is within Israeli society. And all this stuff about and it's producing a similar sort of thing in the people that they are oppressing.